Jai Gurudev.
So I think one of the interesting parts that you brought out in your talk was this idea of Age of Enlightenment teachers with this idea of building up the personality, building up the ego, with this idea that a person can become anything. And then you also brought out that it actually works the opposite way, that the spiritual process of coming to the self is actually based on this idea of not identifying or not saying not identifying, but this idea that the vasanas begin to be released or neutralized, or they're no longer having that impression on the personality and the ego. And I wonder if you could expand a little bit more, on that idea and that process of how that self-identification begins to fall away, whether through the practice of meditation, or are there other, activities when you're not meditating, in between meditations, that one can either hold some conscious attention or put their attention on, that kind of thing. But I think that's a very fascinating process, and that's not really spoken about very often. So I wonder if you would feel free to comment on that. Thank you.
It's a good practical question. And of course, meditation is a must, and proper meditation is even better. Properly taught meditation, properly practiced meditation. This is where that direct experience takes place, where the sense of identity simply dissolves whilst we are still fully aware. And it's canonically spoken of, repeatedly being brought to the attention of the seekers, that the sense of identity is dissolved every night when we go into the state of deep sleep. In terms of the internal processes, it is exemplified by the prana withdrawn from respective organs of cognition, and eventually from the functioning of the manas, mind. So when that happens, there's no identity. So therefore, we have a rest whilst we sleep. We have a rest from the idea of being so and so. And therefore, it is also very well known that the state of deep sleep, even measured, is of profound importance. It equals, like 20 minutes of deep sleep equals hours of sleeping in the state of dream state of consciousness. In fact, one can wake up burdened by dreams so much that one gets out of bed exhausted. What really here feels as total rejuvenation is actually coming out of the state of being nobody. It's that being somebody is what is difficult. Being nobody is actually very easy and natural. But if that was the case, then self-realization will be, everyone will walk around completely in that state of beatitude perpetually. So in a way, that what comes natural, right? Something which is totally natural is the most difficult thing to achieve. And it just, don't even worry about, every spiritual traditions, and believe me, I delved into few to kind of even from that comparative analysis of, speaks about that it's not easy. The simplest, most natural state of who we are is not required to be anybody, because we are already that. Everyone is already a perfect manifestation of being. Beingness is given. It's the greatest gift, if you will, now speaking in these terms. And once given, it's never taken away. Because funny enough, it's never given. It's a status of one's own self. And yet, in deep sleep, it comes natural. We rest from the idea of who we are. Or, let me rephrase it as I like often to do. We rest from the idea who we are not. We rest from the pseudo notion of who we are. And that's what deep sleep state of consciousness is. Now furthermore, the deep sleep state of consciousness, yogically speaking of course, is a sister-brother state of samadhis. Deep sleep and samadhis are very, very close in terms of that, what these states represent. The difference is in the deep sleep, we remain or abide in a state of unconscious. We are unconscious of the environment, unconscious of anything. But samadhis can be of a different kind. There can be samadhi with some frequency, with some awareness of the environment, and yet it is still state of absorption. Just as deep sleep is a state of absorption. Everything is withdrawn into the heart in a deep sleep. Prana is withdrawn. It's not oozing out into and through the apertures, into and through the cognitive faculties. It is withdrawn and at a repose. Therefore, total integration takes place. Deep sleep is a state of integration, but albeit, or alas, unconscious. Samadhi is much more conscious state, similar to deep sleep, but conscious. Therefore, meditation is a must, because in meditation we experience exact same cessation of the sense of non-self. We experience the cessation of this perceived notion of individual. And when it is perceived enough, repeatedly, then it somehow, if you will, also forms a certain neurophysiological connection. I'm now giving you back to our leading neuroscientists, because they are lighting the way, leading the way in this domain. Neurophysiological connection is being created in brain cortexes, because when something is repeatedly experienced, right, it reinforces that connection. Yeah, worked out a lot, right? You know, that the other day I was just saying, right? I worked out in my youth this and that, right? And then I always had that healthy, you know, interest for physical activity. But then I will go through phases of completely ignoring the body, completely. And when you do that, you know, it being felt, you know. You go for a walk, suddenly all your gluteus maximus start to hurt after walk, you know, and the back is hurting and everything. And it's like, oh my, you know, half an hour walk in the hills, not even climbing Himalayas, and I'm already all aching. So of course it's like gotten this kettlebell, you know, I've been throwing it around last couple weeks. First, like all the muscles, like they don't even like move, you know, you do this and that, because there was lack of that connection. And it's the same, just like with the muscles, and it's nothing other than memory. In the same way, these connections are made in neurocortexes. So if we do not have these connections, if we are not wired to experience that sense of absorption, then how can that come? It will just be that at the mercy of, you know, this, people are pop out so much these days, you know, it's constantly. That's unleashing this, unleashing that, and people have these experiences, this experience unasked for. Very hard to make sense out of them. But when it becomes systematically experienced, the neurophysiological connections in the cortexes are made. So therefore this idea of non-self, or rather being nobody, is no longer unfamiliar and scary experience. It's very unsettling when we suddenly blank out. Depersonalizations of all sorts, and this kind of suddenly not knowing who we are is very unsettling. We immediately start pulling ourselves together. We want to immediately reconfigure that identity and with the framework of what we know. Come on, man, don't lose it yet. Don't lose it yet. Therefore, I don't agree with these examples were given by spiritual teachers when they ridiculous examples that they were reminding themselves of who they are by. It's just so DIY. The reminder of who we are comes from this experience in the sittings, through the sittings, when we touch base, touch the ground zero, touch that place of unified field. Proximity to that place already vaporizes the sense of non-self, or the sense of individual self, because it's synonymous here. Individual self, non-self is the same. We will, of course, speak about this maybe, not immediately right now, but in the second part of the webinar, to the universal identity, so that we can put together individual identity and universal identity. How are they reconciled? But I just want to remain with the question so as not to run ahead of time, so that how can one work? What else can be done other than meditations? You asked this question, know very well that, scripturally speaking, and many spiritual luminaries have been reminding us that in our day and age, the best form or the best yoga is the yoga of selfless action, the karma yoga. Somehow it is considered that in our day and age, the karma yoga is the most fitting form of union. Why? Because we are bound to act. There's no way for us to withdraw from the action. We are householders, and we live in a world which is so evolved, developed in its infrastructure and everything, that it's inconceivable to run away from it. Right? You see this, like Buddhist monks sitting now in Nepal, all have mobile phones, checking their Instagram accounts. So there's no way we can somehow pretend that it's not happening. Therefore, this admonition also comes with a reminder that the best form of yoga, the most easiest to practice as well, is karma yoga. The yoga of selfless action. Or, put it differently, is the yoga of action, where the action is assigned to the Supreme, and one remains in a state of non-doership. And that state of non-doership is of tremendous value, because it is that what releases tremendous amount of energy by allowing a relaxation of that grip of being somebody. It's not somehow giving in, considering oneself to be less, considering oneself to be weak. It's a very healthy and very, very wholesome experience. Whenever we don't like doing something, the best way to go about it is not just forcing ourselves to do that, but fall into that state of non-doership. You happen to be already overworked on the home front, and you've done this and that, and oops, you still have to do the washing up whilst everyone else is crushed in front of TV or doing, kicking the ball somewhere or, early to bed, reading, or whatever. You stand in front of that sink. And of course, if you stand there as somebody, a lot of nasty thoughts will come into the head and, but the washing needs to be done, right? It's like, you don't want to wake up and find kitchen sink full of stuff, so you have to do it. So forget about you doing it. It's doing it by itself, fantastically. And suddenly, wow, it's actually fun, and you become creative. You are in a state of flow, not just water flowing out of the tap. You are flowing with this whole thing. It's a dance. You see the reflection of yourself in a cleanly washed plate, in a pot and pan, You are dancing Shiva, not a punished household in front of the sink full of dirty dishes. That's what karma yoga is. And that's why karma yoga is spoken of as the most useful and the surest way to self-realization in our day and age. If only we can apply it, if only we can create that immediate adjustment when we are given to a certain situation's action where the emotional predisposition is required on our part. And that emotional predisposition is rooted in how and what stand we take. If a stand is that I'm doing it, I'm punished now, again it's me, it's what have you, always I'm this nice guy who constantly being a scapegoat and what have you, and it's like, of course, it's the whole world is being carried on the shoulders. And I'm saying that with sincerity of this, how it grips the best of us. But you think I don't experience that? Of course, it's like sometimes it hits you in the head, and then it's like, what? Oh, wow, man, lighten up, forget about it. You're being too burdened by the idea of non-self, that's all, okay? So this is why, if you ask me, what else can be done? How can one practice on a daily basis this non-doership? How can one release that membrane, that tight contracted membrane of being somebody into that free fluid waters of nobody? Because we are only considering ourselves as some kind of happening, as some kind of success, when we are somebody. And nobody is a scary notion. It's a scary affair. Nobody wants to be nobody. And yet, the one who can afford to be nobody affords it all. You see? Of course, we can now start speaking about how this naturally brings the sense of detachment. If you combine this, what is experienced in meditation, that sense of expansion, that when prana uprises and become this all-pervasive jnana, when we are like unraveled, that being unraveled across or through the universe, as whoever said that, whatever that mystic, female mystic said it, right? Doesn't matter, Lila of Kashmir or Rubaiya or I don't know, Mirabai, whoever said it. Or maybe Rumi said it, who cares who said it? The fact is, it's this unraveled as the universe, is that experience of all pervasiveness when we are taken out of ourselves and the parameters of the body no longer exist. We barely perceive anything, there's no inner and the outer. The inner and the outer are lay asunder already. These are the but categories of the language and nothing else. if these experiences are profound enough and we are inevitably, because different pranic flow is in charge now, we are given back to the domain where the body takes over, or bodily function takes over, or that mundane consciousness, let's say, takes over. Not everyone can abide in that same state of all-pervasiveness. And one have to intimately watch that membrane of contraction to know the point of the juncture where that membrane begins to contract itself. Notice that. Notice when that expansiveness, when that sense of all-pervasiveness collapses and suddenly nothing other than tight thoughts with very little space. The nightmare of being thinking mind, suddenly it's just like, suddenly the universe shrinks because our awareness shrunk now. And it's all in the membrane of that somebody versus nobody. Somebody. Therefore, when we lose this completely and utterly any notion of who we are, it's the best time to celebrate. It's the time to celebrate because unfathomable possibilities arise. This is where the real creative process begins. How the universe may come through our being down to 7 generations. This is where we really partake in creation. Not at the surface level of active thinking. Not at the surface level of however grandiose political thinking. You know, when you watch these people who rule countries and, you know, they really, when they talk about the economy, and it's kind of like seductively for a moment, oh my God, these guys really, and ladies, they really know what they're talking about. You know, no, it's all at the surface level, very weak vibration, dense vibrations. Nothing really happening there. It doesn't matter whether they talk about Trump, Brexit, Schmexit, whether this is like solving some fundamental problems of UN, no war, peace, ecological disaster, end of the world, nothing. It's at the surface level, very weak vibrations. And yet when we experience that vacuous state of being nobody, everything in a state of pure potentiality. Consciousness is no longer molten and crystallized into this and that. It's molten ocean of consciousness. It can be anything and everything. It can take any shape at its will. It's magnanimous, it's alive, it moves. That is the state to be. In that state, there's nothing we know, nothing we're sure about. All these are but categories of human language. Irrelevant, in fact, surface level of thinking. But can you believe how much it will take for it to be acknowledged at a collective level? Because we're still completely shrouded in the superstition of the age that we need to constantly know what we're doing. We teach our kids, unless you know what you're doing, unless this project your future, this and that. And yet, those of us who have tapped into the creative process, we already learned from an early age, the less I knew in the moment when I set to create, the more impulse is fountaining through as that stream of creativity. It expresses itself in such unexpected ways that we are bewildered by sheer magnificence of what came through us. So this is what we need to really understand, that we live at the tipping point in culture. We live at the tipping point in culture of what this whole notion of being human truly represents. So so much for being somebody. Being is fundamentally the most important asset of anything there is that we can ever realize. Realizing the beingness of our being is all there is. The rest is a play of consciousness, chitta vilas. The rest is play as you will. It will play through you anyway. You want to just have a quiet life, it will take you, smack you, and make you a leader of something, of sorts. You'll be running this and that for a president or for this in no time. So, how to work with it? Well, reflect on this. Sit with this understanding. Right? Who is it? Meister Eckhart, who was, I'm talking about the heritage of the Christian mystics. Talked about the proportion of how much God, how much Almighty there is in me. It's to the proportion. The less myself there is, the more God there is. The less myself there is, the more God there is, you see?